In this video, we're going to cover an introduction to SPSS and Excel. We're going to go through both of these pieces of software and then do kind of a quick demonstration on a few different things that you can do with these, with the software when we're going through different types of analysis. This is going to be a practice run with some basic information, but mostly just is here to get you comfortable with these two pieces of software and make sure you can open them and have them run well on your computer. So the first step is actually making sure that we can open both of these. And so follow along with me here. I want to make sure that you are using this in the right way. And so I have some suggestions on how to go about using these two programs in what I find to be the best way for them to work well together. So I'm going to start off here by looking at the Office suite and making sure you can get that installed on your computer. If you already have it installed on your computer, then you're set to go. But if you haven't, I'm going to show you how you can go about doing that. So follow along with me here as we go through. So we're going to Google first, just Clemson software. And in this first link, you can actually skip down to the Office 365 option here. And if you follow that, it's going to take you to this CCIT website where you can log in to Office 365. And many of you may be familiar with this as we come over here to our Office login. And this may look familiar to you. When you're using Microsoft Online, you can access the different pieces of software over here on the left and things like that. But what I want you to look for here is over in the top right, if we're looking here under Install and More, if we click this, we can actually install our Microsoft apps. And what I want you to make sure you have is Excel installed onto your computer. That's going to be the best way to use it, and it's going to limit any of the issues that you may run into if you try and use it through the web over here. So I recommend you install Excel and go about using it that way. Once you've done that, our next step is to actually go ahead and get SPSS opened up. Now, I recommend doing this a slightly different way than you may have done in the past. There's a couple different ways that we can access SPSS. So you may have installed it on your computer through CCIT or Citrix, but I'm going to show you a way to use it actually in a web browser. And contrary to Excel, I think this works much better this way. So I think having Excel local downloaded onto your computer is ideal. And I think using the internet or web browser based version of SPSS is ideal. So to open up SPSS in a web browser, we're going to go to CU Apps and follow this first link here to log in. When we click here, it's going to ask us for our username. We can go ahead and log in with our username and password. It's going to prompt us to log in with our Duo. Once we've done that, it should bring us to a page that looks familiar to us and just like Citrix. Now, the benefit of this being in a web browser means we don't have to worry about the VPN or any of that complicated computer connectivity issues that you might have had in previous semesters. So we're going to go up here and we're going to go to Apps. And as we scroll down, we will eventually find the SPSS versions. Now, these may be different depending on when you're looking at this. But for me, what I see is 27, 28, and 29. Any of these versions will work perfectly fine for what we're going to do in this course. But I'm going to go ahead and just use version 29 because it's the most recent. But again, any of these three versions will work perfectly fine. So I'm going to click on that, and that is going to actually launch and open up a blank SPSS document. So we'll give that a second to open up. And while it's doing this, we can take a look at the other two documents that we have. So you should see two files in this assignment for you to download. The first one is going to be just the Word document that has the assignment that we're going to walk through and follow along together and go through. This has all of our questions and where we're going to be putting our answers into. The second file is going to be an Excel file. And so you want to make sure that you open that in Excel. If you're on a Mac and you try and open it, sometimes it may try and default to numbers. Make sure you now open up Excel now that you have that installed and go ahead and open up this second file, which should end up looking like this, which we have 100 participants of data that we're going to be working with today. Once we have our Excel file and our Word document open, we can check and make sure that now SPSS has opened up. We don't need this window. And we get now a blank SPSS document that we can work with. So we're going to do a couple things as we kind of go through this. So let's take a look quickly one more time at the instruction sheet and talk about what we're going to be doing. And then I'm going to walk through the process and you can follow along and put your answers in as we go. So what we have here is a set of data. This is just a snippet of it. The full data is in the Excel file. And we have, you can see participant number, age, sex, and ethnicity of 100 different participants. And what we're going to do is just kind of practice working with this data set, both in Excel and in SPSS. The reason we use both of these programs is because sometimes there are tasks that we want to do in Excel and are easier to do in Excel, cleaning and organizing our data, before we move into SPSS to actually analyze it using statistical analysis. So each program has its pros and cons to it. And that's why I'm going to show you some things in both, and you can kind of get a feel for why you might use one program over the other. All right, so let's go ahead and start looking at our first task here. So if you want to go ahead and follow along with me, we're going to walk through step one. So step one is opening and importing Excel in SPSS. So hopefully you've already opened up the Excel file. And if we take a look at this Excel file, we can see here that the first question is asking us, what is the sex and age of participant 50? Make sure you look at the participant number here, find participant 50, and report what that value is. Part B, we have already completed opening up SPSS, so we should have that open and ready to go now in our web browser over here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take the data from SPSS or from Excel and move it over into SPSS. And there are a few different steps to take to do that. They're all listed in the assignment sheet, so you can follow along there as I complete this as we go. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start off by creating our variables. So if we take a look at SPSS, SPSS actually has two different views to it. We have our data view, which we're starting off looking at down here. And then we also have our variable view. So there's two different views we can switch between in SPSS. We're going to actually start off by choosing our variable view. And you can now see things have changed a little bit. The way this view works is we have all of our variables are going to be listed here in a row as we go down. We have the name of each variable and then different factors about that variable. Today, we're pretty much just going to be focusing on the name, but as we go throughout the semester, we'll incorporate more of these other values throughout this. So what we want to do is we want to input the name of each of the variables that we have. So if we check our data sheet, you can look back at it. We know that we have 4 different pieces of information we're going to be entering. The first one is our participant number. Then we have our age variable, our sex variable, and our ethnicity variable. A couple things to note when you're entering variable names. Make sure that you don't put any spaces in. SPSS doesn't like spaces. If I were to try to do that, if I put a space in, it says it's an illegal character. And so it won't let you name any variables that include spaces. So make sure that you don't include that. If you're running into that problem, that's probably what's going on. All right, so we have our 4 variables set like this, and we are actually going to talk about the first 3 criteria here, but we're not going to worry about anything else at this point yet. So the first section is our variable type. You see by default, it sets it to numeric. That means it's going to expect us to put a number into our variable. And if we check back real quick to our Excel sheet, you can see that for the first 2 variables, it is in fact numbers that we're going to be entering. However, for our second 2 variables, it's not numbers and instead are actually words. So we need to make sure that we change the variable type from numeric to something else. So let's go ahead and look back at our type. And by clicking on one of those cells, we can actually change the type for that variable. And so I'm going to click on it and then click these three dots. And now you can see that I get the option to change what type of variable this is. So rather than numeric, we're actually going to come down and we're going to select string. So string is, think of like a string of letters to make up a word. So a string of characters is what we want if we're using words. So string for that, numeric if we're using numbers. So we're going to select string for our sex variable and do the same thing for our ethnicity variable. Come down and change it to string. Width, we can leave mostly at 8 for most of these. That's how many individual digits it's going to allow us to put in for each piece of data that we're entering. If we look back at our data, you can see that each individual piece of data isn't anywhere close to 8 digits long, so we are perfectly fine for these two variables. For our sex variable, male is 4 letters, so we're still underneath that limit of 8. Female is actually 6 letters, and again, we're still underneath that limit of 8. However, when we look at ethnicity, there are some answer choices here that are actually more than 8 letters long. And so if we're to leave it at 8, we're going to have an issue where it's going to start cutting off our responses here with only 8 letters. So we want to bump that up a little bit for our ethnicity variable to make sure each of our responses has enough space to fit into that data type. So I'm going to go ahead and change ethnicity to say something like 20, and that's going to give me enough space to make sure all of those can fit. Once we've done this, all of our variables are set to go, and we can switch back over to our data view down here, and you can see that when we do that, we're going to get our variables listed across the top of our data sheet entered in. And so we know now that each of these vertical columns are going to be all of the data for each of our 4 variables that we're entering. Now, each row is going to correspond to each participant, just like we see when we look in the Excel sheet where we have each row corresponding to one participant. All right, now the next step is fun. It's the thing that's either going to go smoothly or give you a little bit of trouble. And that is simply how to get this information or this data from Excel into SPSS. The easiest way I find to do it is to simply copy and paste the data. Sometimes SPSS lags a little bit and it will take a minute to realize you've copied something to your computer. If that happens, we can try and do this a couple different ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to highlight and select all of my data that I have in Excel. When I do this, make note, ensure that you stop at the end of your data and also that you aren't including those variable names. We just want to start with the first piece of data that we have. With that highlighted, I'm going to right click and copy this information. And now I can switch back to SPSS and I want to start in this first cell. This is where I'm going to start pasting my data. Notice before I hit paste that there's a couple different ways that we can select a cell. If I just click one time on a cell, notice I get this gray box highlighting the cell. If I double click onto a cell, notice now I have a white box with a blinking cursor. I want to make sure that before I paste my data, I do a single selection so that I get that gray box. With that highlighted like that, I can then right click and hopefully it's going to let you paste. Now, most of the time, SPSS needs you to use the keyboard shortcut first for it to recognize that you've copied something on your computer. So I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut of Control V as in Victor. And this is going to have SPSS ask me whether it is going to allow me to see my clipboard. So I'm going to allow this. And it didn't work this first time, but now that it has that permission, it hopefully will work this next time. And now I hit that keyboard shortcut again, and you can see all of my data gets pasted in. If that's giving you trouble, I would try again the keyboard shortcut first. Sometimes though, you might have to right click and maybe now that paste option will appear, or even sometimes you can go to edit and you'll have the paste option appear up here. So these are a few different ways you can try and get that paste to work. Sometimes, like I said, it might take a minute to recognize that you've copied something on your computer. Just keep trying and wait a minute. If it isn't pasting, hopefully it should paste after not too long. All right, so our end result, now that we've followed all of these steps, is that we end up with our data set open up in SPSS and the same data set now open in Excel. So we have both of these. We're going to practice doing some things in both of these programs simultaneously and talk about some pros and cons to using each one of them. All right, that wraps up step 1. So we're going to move on to step 2, which is cleaning the data. So oftentimes when we have data and we download our data, one of the first things we have to do is clean that data. We need to remove some information that we may not want to include in our final analysis. Sometimes this step is done in Excel and sometimes this step is done in SPSS. We're going to walk through how to do it in both of these. So the step that we're taking, or the data that we want to remove, is, in this case, anybody that's under the age of 18. So if we look through our age variable, we can find there might be some participants that their age is less than 18, and for that reason, we don't want to include them in our data set. So we could certainly go through and read each one and try and find all of them, but we might miss them, and it's just kind of a cumbersome way to go about solving this problem. So there's a couple different ways that we can do this in Excel and in SPSS to make this easier. The first way I'm going to show you in Excel is to include or write a very simple formula to search and find any values less than 18. So I'm going to call this a variable called underage. And anytime in Excel we want to compute something or write a formula or have it do anything other than just put what we have typed into our cell, we want to start off by typing in an equals sign. This is going to tell it that we are writing a formula. We're going to tell it to compute something. So I'm going to say equals. In this case, I'm going to write if. So now we get this pop-up of these different formulas that appear. And I can select this if formula by double clicking on it. And now I am writing an if statement or an if formula to tell SPSS what I want to include in this cell. So notice how it actually tells me the format that it's going to be looking for and what step I'm on in this case. So right now it's looking for a logical test for me to enter in. And that's simply going to be if this value, which is the age of participant 1, and I can just simply click on that cell and it's going to fill in the right piece of information here. If this value of age is less than 18. Well, that's my logical test. If it's less than 18, then I want to do something. And so now what I need to do is put a comma in, and that's going to move me on to the next step of the formula. So I put a comma, and now you'll see the next step of the formula is selected. So what do I want Excel to output if this value is true? So if the age is less than 18, well, I'm going to say I want a value of 1 here in this case. Then I can put a comma, and what do I want if that's not true? So if they're not less than 18, I'm going to put a value of 0. I can then close those parentheses. Notice it finishes the formula, and I can hit enter, and we get a value of 0, telling us that our participant is not underage because they are above the age of 18. Now, while that's fantastic, I don't want to write that formula 100 more times, or I guess 99 more times. Instead, I just want to apply this all the way down my sheet. And that's where the power of Excel comes in. I can actually take this cell that I've now created this formula in, and by double clicking that bottom right green square, it's going to apply this formula all the way down to the end of my data sheet. Notice now that I can search through, and anytime I see a 1, notice it's referencing the cell in that row, we can identify that that participant is under the age of 18. Get another one here. That participant is under the age of 18. And again, we get one here under the age of 18. So now we have a filter that tells us anytime someone is underage, and we can use this to detect anybody that is underage. So that is one way to do this in Excel. Let's talk about, actually before we move on, let's just point out that there are 2 questions for this method. Using this, how many participants did you find to be underage, and what were their participant numbers? So I'm going to let you go ahead and answer that question based on anybody that appeared with a 1. What were their participant numbers and how many were their total? Let's talk about how we might do this in SPSS. So if we're in SPSS, we want to accomplish the same goal. We're going to look for anybody that's under the age of 18, and we know that there are some because it's the same data that we just worked with. But there's a different approach to take when doing this in SPSS. So to go about doing this, again, you can follow along the instructions, but I'm going to walk you through this here. We're going to go up to the top of our sheet, and we're going to go to the Data tab. Now, oftentimes, anytime we're working with our data, manipulating it, organizing it, things like that, we're going to use this Data tab to do different things. We can do things like sorting, which we're going to come back to here in a second, as well as selecting specific cases. So what we want to do here is use this Select Cases option to see which participants are over 18. So if I select this, it brings up a pop-up window that I now need to tell SPSS how I want to go about selecting my data. So currently, it has all cases, or you can think all participants are selected. I want to instead change this to only if some condition is satisfied. And in our case, the condition is that they have to be over the age of 18. So if I select this, I need to tell SPSS what this condition is. So you'll notice I'm basically making another if statement, just like I did in Excel. So I can click this if button, and it now pulls up a new window that I need to input some function to tell it what I'm looking for. So I want to select cases if, in this case, if our age, we can select our age variable, put it into our formula. If age is, in this case, we want to do greater than or equal to 18. So rather than in this case selecting participants under the age of 18, we want to select participants that are 18 years or older. So we want to remove anybody that's less than 18. So if we select age greater than or equal to 18, we can hit continue, and that now applies this filter here to our option that is selected. I can now go ahead, make sure this is chosen, and hit OK for it to run this filter. You notice we get a new variable, and basically we're doing the opposite here that we did in Excel. Now anybody that is under the age of 18 gets a 0, and everybody else gets a 1, saying they are included in our data. So again, two different ways to do this. We can scroll down and find participants again that are under the age of 18, and we can see those are crossed out if we have that option here selected. This is how it looks in SPSS version 29, the version that I'm in. If you're in an older version, it's possible that rather than crossing these out, it's simply going to remove them from your data set and you won't see them. I believe if you go to edit, it's either under file or edit, or maybe even view. There is an option in one of those that says to show unselected cases. And if you just check that, then it's going to look just like this looks here on my screen. All right, so again, if we answer the questions that we found, how many participants did we find using this method? Hopefully the same number as we found before. You can look through and again, report their participant numbers. And then the last question here just asks, which method did you prefer? I always like asking this because some people like to do this in SPSS and some people like the method in Excel better. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious which one you guys tend to prefer. All right, so that is selecting cases or removing participants. The next step we're on to is part B, under step 2 still, part B, reordering and organizing your data. So we're going to switch back to Excel and take a look at this as our first step, how we can reorder and resort our participants. So one thing I want you to know about Excel is there's a shortcut in selecting data. If I click on any one individual cell, of course it selects that cell. But if I want to select, say, a whole row, I can actually click the number on the left, and that's going to select the entire row. I can also click a letter at the top, and that's going to select the entire column. If I combine these two things into this option up in the top left, there's a gray triangle or a little half square. If I click this, it highlights my entire data sheet. So this is helpful when you want to make sure that you're selecting everything to apply these sorting features to. So with everything selected, I'm going to go up under my Home tab over towards the right under Editing and go to Sort and Filtering. From here, I want to choose Custom Sort. And with this, I can choose, make sure it has my data, has headers selected. That's going to tell it our first rows are variable names. And I can sort by any of the variables that I have selected. In this case, we're going to sort by sex, and we can leave the order from A to Z. That's just going to be in alphabetical order. Once I've done that, I can hit OK. And notice now that my data gets resorted where all of my female participants appear first and all my male participants appear at the bottom. So using this, what was the first row that a male participant appeared? That's the question for this section. All right, let's go ahead and look at this in SPSS as well. So if we switch back over here, we can do the same thing. We can order and sort this based on whatever criteria we would like. In SPSS, we don't have to select our whole data sheet like we normally do in Excel. It's always going to apply whatever you do to everything. So I'm going to go back to my data tab up here at the top. And in this case, I want to select Sort Cases. And if I select this, it's going to bring up a pop-up window. And now I can choose which variable I want to sort by. Rather than sorting by sex, this time let's sort by age. And if I add this variable to the right, I'm now going to sort by age, and I can choose whether I want that to be ascending or descending. I'm going to leave it as it is and hit OK. And now you'll notice all of my data gets sorted. Notice all of my participants under the age of 18 appear at the top now because that's in order. And I can scroll through and see age is going to continue to increase as I scroll through my data set. And so the question here is asking, what is the age of the oldest participant? You should be able to find that easily now by scrolling to the bottom of your data sheet and seeing what that was. Again, with which method did you prefer? Some people like Excel, some people like SPSS. You may not have a preference, and that's okay as well. That's kind of me. I like knowing how to do this in both pieces of software. All right, on to the third and final step, and this is looking at some frequencies and descriptives. So this is very basic analysis, just to kind of look at some, again, basic pieces of information about our data and practice doing that. So let's go ahead and look at this, and we're going to start off actually by looking at frequencies. This is how often any piece of information appears in our data. Now, this is something we can do in both pieces of software, but it's so easy and efficient to do in SPSS that I'm really just going to show you that method and recommend that you use that for any frequency analysis that you have. So once we have our data sorted, we're not going to use data anymore. We're actually going to use the Analyze tab for most everything else that we do after we have the data how we want it. This is where we're going to do all of our statistical analysis, as well as look at frequencies and descriptives. So I'm going to start off by going to Descriptive Statistics, and notice here we have some of these options, frequencies and descriptives. I said before we're looking at frequencies, so I'm going to go ahead and select that first. And this is now going to pop up a window that has me select which variables I want to look at the frequencies for. In our case here, we don't really care about participant number. We know that each participant number only appears once by definition. They're unique numbers for each participant. So there's no real use in doing a participant frequency analysis. However, we do want to include some other options. We're going to go ahead and look at, in this case, age, sex, and ethnicity for our frequency analysis. We don't need to do anything else here. We're just going to include those three variables and hit OK to run this analysis. Now, anytime you run an analysis in SPSS, it pulls up a new output window. You can see this is a new window here. And again, you can see down here at the bottom, we have our output window and our data window that we have as separate windows. In this output, we can see our frequency analysis for each of our variables. We see our age, sex, and ethnicity, just general numbers that are being included. Then we have our frequency table for age, sex, and ethnicity as we go. So this question, number one, is asking us how many participants specifically aged 30 did we have in the study? So we could look under age. We could find the value, which is the age option. Let's say participants who were 20 years old. There were 9 of those in our data set. So do the same thing for how many age 30 participants. We can also look and see how many males and females we had in our data, 40 males, 57 females. And then for ethnicity, we can look at this question, how many participants of Asian descent did we have? And if we look, we can see what that frequency value is here. So that's how I would recommend you do frequency analysis, is to use SPSS, put any variable you're curious about in there, and it's going to just give you all of the information very quickly and easily. For descriptive statistics, moving on now to part B and our last part here, we can do this in both Excel and SPSS depending on what we're looking for. So we're going to use here the example of average age. So we can do this by writing a simple formula in Excel to compute the age of our participants. So remember, anytime we want Excel to compute something, we're going to start off by typing in an equal sign. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to label this as average age. And then, actually, this is SPSS. I need to go into Excel. So what I'm going to do is just create a new variable here and call this average age. And here we're going to go ahead and compute this by typing in an equal sign. And we want this to equal the average. You can see as I start typing it, I get this average formula here that I can click on to start this formula. I just want this to be the average of all of these ages. So I'm going to click and drag all the way to the bottom of my sheet. So I have every single age value selected. And then I can close my parentheses, hit enter, and it's going to calculate what that average age is of all of my participants. So again, what is the average age according to our Excel sample? We get that value right here. Again, we can do this in SPSS. It's going to be slightly different, but to do this, we're going to go ahead and start with our analysis tab like we did before. We're going to go to descriptive statistics, but rather than frequencies, we're actually going to use descriptives. Notice also when I choose this and my box pops up, there are less options for me to include. I can't run descriptives on sex or ethnicity because they're not numeric variables. We can only run descriptives on numeric variables, which in our case are our participant number and our age. We don't care about participant number. We just want to look at age. So I'm going to go ahead and move that over to my variables, which I want to include. Go ahead and hit OK. And you'll notice now at the bottom of my output window, we have a new table that is my descriptive statistics for age. And I can look over and find the mean value of that, which gives me my average age of my SPSS sample. Now, you might notice this being 28.6289 and Excel being 28.28, those values are slightly different. There's a reason for this. So if we think about this, the reason is in Excel, notice I selected all of my participants, even those under the age of 18. In SPSS, you'll notice that I'm not including those 3 17-year-old participants. So it is only doing the average of the remaining 97 participants, which is why we get a slightly different value appearing here. So that's an important lesson to pay attention to. If you're selecting participants to remove in Excel, you need to make sure that you actually remove those data, or you might accidentally include them in different analyses that you're doing. In SPSS, it takes care of a lot of that work for you and makes sure that once you don't select them, they aren't included in any of the results. So again, if you preferred one of these methods, go ahead and include that in your answer, or you can, say that you like them both. That's perfectly fine as well. Just curious about how you feel about that. All right, and that should bring us to the end of our assignment here. So at the end of the day, both of these pieces of software are useful for different reasons, different methods, and different steps along the way of cleaning, organizing, and analyzing our data. So we're going to use both of these as we go throughout the semester. We'll mostly focus on SPSS until we get to your actual data analysis, where we'll go back and look at a little bit of steps to take in Excel. All right, I hope this was helpful, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.